Hello there everybody, Sam Strains here, welcome back to the Railway and welcome to my top 5 worst model trains of 2019. So, I know what you're probably thinking, crikey, this all sounds rather negative for a video so close to Christmas, and yeah, I guess you're right, you've probably got a point there. However, I do intend to create a top 5 model train video of 2019 very soon, so stay tuned for that if you'd like some more positivity. However, I do think it's quite important that we do talk about the turds of this hobby as well as the gold, because it's important for you guys to know what to avoid as well as what to look for. So that's the purpose of this video. Now, a few things I should mention first of all. As you're seeing my top 5 worst model trains, you might think to yourself, blimey, these don't seem all of that bad. I mean, some of them do, but you might think on a few of them, blimey, that doesn't seem all that terrible. Well, there's a very good reason for that, and the reason is I don't deliberately buy bad model trains. So when I'm shopping online, when I'm on Hattons or whatever, and I see a loco that doesn't look like it's going to be that great, or if I think, you know, this seems like a lot of money for what it is, generally speaking, I won't buy it. 99% of the time I'm spending my own money on these models, right? It's very, very rare that I would get sent a sample for free. And so given that this stuff costs me, you know, it is my own money, I obviously don't like to waste my money, and so I don't buy models that are poor intentionally. Most of the time. So once or twice, if the price is right, if it's cheap enough, I might intentionally buy a really rubbishy model to review because I think it will be entertaining. And then sometimes a model might slip under the radar and I'll accidentally buy a poor model. Oh dear, little bit of interference there. So yeah, sometimes a poor model will slip under the radar, but the point is I don't deliberately buy poor model trains, so most of these might not be that terrible, but as you know, in each review I do give my locos a ranking out of 10, and so because it's numbers, there have to be 5 at the bottom, so that's what I'm going to show you today. The next thing is you might notice that not all of today's models are brand new, some of them might have been released a few years ago, and that's because these locos are taken from the list of locos that I've reviewed this year and not necessarily from the list of locos that were released this year, and that's just because of the way I do things. There aren't enough models released every year for me to make a channel about it. I have to review some older stuff. So with that, I think we are ready to get started. I'm going to start with the least terrible and work down to the very worst model I reviewed this year. So let's get to it. The first model, let me grab it. It is this, the Bakwin USA Class 2 MT. Now, if you take a look at this, this might be one of those that you would say, hey, that doesn't look too bad. And that is true, I would say, for the most part. So looking at it, it looks fantastic. The painted detail is superb. The level of separately fitted and other details is absolutely fine. I guess the cab is a little bit underwhelming, but for the most part, it doesn't look too bad. The main problem with this is the performance and the mechanism. Now, this is an extremely expensive model. It has an RRP of £144.95. And when you spend that kind of money on a model from any manufacturer, you expect, and usually you get, a really good quality mechanism. Certainly, I would say if you spent that kind of money with Hornby, you would expect to get at the very least, a decent mechanism. And I think that's where this particular model really fell down. So first of all, it had no tender pickups. In fact, the loco relies on just the 3 sets of driving wheels, the 6 driving wheels, to pick up power from the track, which means that continuity with the track isn't that great. And you might also find that you're having to clean the wheels more regularly as well, because I found that if fewer wheels are picking up, then they tend to get dirty a lot more quickly. So there's that. Also, there's no proper bearings in the chassis. The wheels just sit, I think, into very awkward looking square bearings on the chassis, which is not very good for wear and tear. And to top it all off, it's running on a 3-pole motor. And as we know, 5-pole motors do tend to run a lot better than 3 poles, in my experience anyway, and they're not all that expensive. I recently bought loads of 5-pole motors to replace some of my failing Hornby motors for like £2 each, and they work absolutely fine. So yeah, it's just mechanically a little bit of a letdown, and of course, because it's so expensive, it was knocked down not only on the mechanism category, but also on the value for money category. So for that, I gave the Bakwin 2MT a 6.34 out of 10. So not too bad. It's still got higher than 5, so it's not a bad model by any means, but it's pretty low by my standards, I would say. Alright, so number 4 on my list of worst locomotives of 2019 is one from Hornby, and it is this. It is the Hornby B2P. Now, a few things to tell you about this one. First of all, I will start with why this is on the list at all. The reason is, I think with this one, is that it's a case of mistaken identity. So this loco was first released, it was either under Dapo or Airfix, I'm not too sure. I think it might have been both, but which was first, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. However, this is a very, very old model. When it was first released, I think at least 30 years ago. It might even have been as far back as the 1970s, but it's a very, very old model. It dates back many, many years. However, a few years ago when Hornby re-released this, they didn't put it in the railroad range. They didn't put it in the basic range where I believe it belonged. Instead, they slapped modern packaging onto it, as you can see, and a relatively modern price tag. A handful of years ago, this was for sale for £99, which back then was quite a lot of money, I thought, for a loco that was so basic. So as you can see, yeah, there is not a lot of detail going on with this, and to be honest with you, there wasn't even any attempt made really to modernise this. I mean, look at the cab. No painted detail inside there whatsoever, which is pretty noticeable, and generally speaking, the level of detail is very basic. There's certainly no sprung buffers or anything like that. Now, to be absolutely fair to Hornby, they did try to modernise this loco, at least where the performance and the mechanism was concerned. So they upgraded it to loco drive, which meant that the loco itself was doing the work rather than the tender. But that resulted in a couple of things. First of all, because the loco was much lighter than the tender, it resulted in a massive downgrade in terms of pulling power. And to combat that, as you can see here, if I turn this over, Hornby fitted this with traction tyres, which is not a very nice feature, particularly not on a top-of-the-range model, or a model that is supposed to be top of the range. And so when I scored this loco, I ended up giving it 5.71 out of 10, so a little bit lower than the 2MT. Still above 5 though, so we're not doing too badly there. But either way, yes, I didn't think this loco deserved to be in the main range. I didn't think it was anywhere close to being that good. And so it was a little bit misleading, I think, of Hornby to include this in their main range. Okay, let's move on to number 3. So number 3 is also a loco from Hornby, but it's not in the bottom 5 for the same reason that the 2P was. So number 3 is this. It is the Hornby Railroad B17. And notice I did say railroad there. So yes, this is quite a basic model, as you can probably tell by looking at it. But Hornby did the right thing. They did the only thing they could have done reasonably, really, and put this into their railroad range, which is excellent on the one hand, because obviously you know that when you buy this, you're not going to be getting a great level of detail. However, normally when you buy something from the Hornby Railroad range, you can at least expect some good performance from it. And that's where this one really fell down. So obviously it didn't get a great rating on the level of detail, because obviously as a railroad loco, it's not supposed to have a lot of detail on it. So the detail mark was low. And then if you remember during the review when I got it down onto the track, the performance really wasn't that good. First of all, its slow speed was pretty terrible. It wouldn't do a crawl really. I then noticed that it didn't have any tender pickups, despite having all of the wiring in place going to the tender, so that it could really have had working tender pickups if Hornby had wanted to do that. So again, a little bit like the Bakwin 2MT, that could lead to reliability issues as well. And on top of all of that, when I got it running, it made an awful lot of noise. The valve gear, I seem to remember, was catching on itself and making clicking noises as it ran. And it was also not very powerful. I remember it struggling quite badly as well. So yeah, the problem with this is not the level of detail, because you know that that's what you're getting yourself in for. But you expect good performance even from Hornby Railroad locos, and sadly this one did not deliver. This also cost the best part of £100. I think the RRP was £95 something, so that's still a lot to pay for a loco that's not that great. And so this got a rating of 5.69, I believe, which again is still above 5, although I believe on the next one we might be getting close to 5, or possibly even dropping below. So we'll get to that in just a second. First of all though, let's do a quick running session with these 3 locos, and I don't know, we'll call it a bit of a commiserative run, shall we? See how it goes. Alright, let's try it. So there we have the Bakwin IVAT Class 2 coming in the distance. I would say that this is easily the least terrible of the models I'm showing you today. However, a poor quality mechanism on an extremely expensive model is completely unacceptable in my opinion. And so for that reason, I would say that it does deserve to be here in the bottom 5. But whether you guys agree or not, obviously I don't know. So I will put up a poll so that you can let me know. Does the IVAT 2MT deserve to be in the bottom 5? One loco that I think does definitely deserve to be in the bottom 5 is this, of course, the Hornby B2P. I can still remember the disappointment when I first bought this. I mean, this was quite a few years ago and I wasn't earning very much in those days. So £100 felt, and I suppose still is, an awful lot of money. I didn't have a lot of modern locos back then, but I'd heard how the modern Hornby locos had painted cabs and I was really excited to see it. And then it arrived and I thought, well, this is really no different to the Triang locos that I'd bought at the time. And obviously I'd got those because they were cheap and I could afford them. And this was the first time I'd actually spent any kind of real money, really, on a loco, or I hadn't done it many times. I'd only really bought railroad stuff at that point. So for that reason, for the fact that it is pretty misleading, I think, with the way it's marketed, I think it does deserve to be there. As for the B17, I can remember really wanting to give that a higher score because obviously I'm a huge fan of anything that might encourage new blood into the hobby. However, because of its performance, it doesn't do that. Anyone joining the hobby is going to be put off it if they're having to clean the wheels all the time and listen to the rumpus as the thing runs along. And it's still very noisy even today, whether you can hear that or not, I'm not sure. But yeah, definitely not Hornby's best runner, that's for sure. So there you have it then, folks, the first 3 rotters that I would recommend removing from your Christmas list if you haven't already. Let's wait for that 2p. Right, very nice, or not so much, as the case may be. Right, shall we move on then? Because if you think these are bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. Let's get to it. So let's get back to the list then with number 2. So this is the second worst model I reviewed this year, and it is this, the RAF, Royal Air Force, Spirit of the Royal Air Force, Class 156 from Hornby. And once again, just like the 2P really, in many ways, I think this loco was a case of mistaken identity as well. So it was very expensive, £125 I believe, and I didn't know this when I bought it, which is part of the problem I think. But this is actually several years old, 25 years old plus I think it was. And of course that £125, when you think it's a new model, sounds pretty good, but then when you learn that it's, you know, up to 30 years old I think it was, you suddenly start to realise, hang on, that isn't quite so good. And sure enough, yeah, the level of detail really did suck with this one. There's very, very few separately fitted parts, as you can see. It doesn't have any working lights or anything like that. No interior lights, no headlights, no tail lights, no lights whatsoever. In fact, the non-driven car, which is this one, doesn't have any pickups on it at all. And that, I suppose, leads us on to performance, because this didn't run that great either. When I first tried it, it ran pretty well. It did a decent crawl, but after half an hour's running, it lost its ability to crawl. It was very, very noisy when it was running, and on top of all that, it's got traction tyres on it as well, because only one bogie is driven. So yeah, it was just very expensive. One thing I really did like about it was, of course, the livery. I think Hornby did that very well, and that's the one feature about this that is not severely dated, in my opinion. But everything else really wasn't very good. Even the quality sucked, in my opinion, because if you remember, there was loads of scratches on the windows. So yeah, I think it was just, as I say, nothing absolutely terrible about it, but it didn't do very well in any category. I think the detail was a 2, I think the value for money was a 2. I don't think this scored more than a 3 in any category, if I remember, and I think combining all of those relatively mediocre ratings together just gave it a really bad score, and it got 5.17 out of 10, I believe, so we're getting really close to the 5 out of 10. However, this is nowhere near as bad as the bottom loco of the year. Maybe you'll remember what it is, but it is a real festering turd. So let's get to it now. So this model is the only model in the list which I would describe as an irredeemably terrible model with no redeeming features. Can you remember which one it was? Well, it was this. It is the Bakwin USA Prairie, and as you can see, the body doesn't stay on properly. And yes, that's a feature because they're self-tapping screws and they don't stay in properly. Man, where do we start with this? Well, we'll start with the price. Now, I bought this second-hand from Hatton's for £50. I don't know what the RRP was. As I say, it was just second-hand. But first of all, we got off on the wrong foot because I paid far too much for it. The level of detail I would describe as hideous. It is a hideous model. The one thing that springs to mind again is the bell and the, I think, whistle. I'm not going to say whistle for sure because it's actually unclear what it is. It's just a mess of what looks like melted plastic. Yeah, the bell and the whistle, if you look at those, you get a sense of the level of detail on this. It's absolutely horrendous. Now, performance is pretty bad as well. It's a split chassis model, so you can't DCC it without an awful lot of pain and anguish. It's got traction tyres on it, as you can see. Look at that, horrendous. It doesn't have any metal wheels on the tender, let alone any pickups, so you've got no chance whatsoever of getting reliable running from this. It has a smoke generator inside, which you might think is pretty good. It's reasonably effective, it does work. However, if you forget to fill it up and it runs dry, you melt down the loco, literally. I've had that happen before with one of these. You'll notice that the chimney might start to sink into the bodywork because it's gotten too hot and there's no sort of safety cutout on them. Yeah, it's just a really, really horrid loco. Really, really don't like this one. I gave it a 4.11 out of 10, and even that was probably quite generous. So there we go. Let's get these final two running then and just have a little bit of a laugh at them, shall we? So there we have the Super Sprinter, which did actually divide people a little bit on my review, in the comments that is. Most people did agree with me, most people thought that this was unreasonable and a little bit misleading. But there were a few who thought this was actually okay, and it was cheap enough for them, and from a distance it looked alright, that's what they said. I personally don't really agree with that. I think for £125, that's too much to pay for something that only looks good from a distance. Especially when you compare it to something like the Dapol 121s that I reviewed recently. They actually have basically the same RRP. Yes, it's a one-car set rather than a two-car set, but it has proper lighting. It has an astonishing level of detail, and in Hatton's sale, it's considerably cheaper than this Super Sprinter here. True, it didn't work properly, but neither did the Super Sprinter. Its performance isn't that great. So yeah, that sucks a little bit. Obviously though, it's nowhere near as bad as this, the Bakwin Prairie, as you can see wobbling along there. Interestingly, I haven't put any more smoke fluid in, so we'll see if it melts down, although I don't intend to run it for very long because obviously it doesn't perform nicely and it's not very pleasurable to watch, is it? So there you have it, folks, my bottom 5 locomotives of 2019. As I said at the start, I don't think a lot of them were absolutely terrible, except for the last one. But let me know what you thought. Which one was the worst for you, although I'm pretty sure I can guess. And have you had any really terrible locos this year that you wish you hadn't bought? As always, do let me know down in the comments. For now though, have a very Merry Christmas. I will see you with another video very soon, hopefully a bit more positive, as I say, with my top 5 models of 2019. Hopefully we'll be seeing the best of the best in that video. For now though, thank you very much for watching. Have a great week and a great Christmas if I don't see you before. Can't remember whether this is the last video before Christmas or not. But either way, have a great week. As you can see, I've still got snow on the layout here, so I'll be having fun. You have a great time as well, and I'll see you soon. Cheers everybody.